All right. Welcome back. So let's see. So we should all have a working development environment, right? We should have Node.js running our machine, WebStorm and Git running our machine. We have also an OpenShift. We've been able to push, and presumably we've already submitted our first assignment, the web development assignment, which was just just a simple index page, a hello world, and you should be working on the first real assignment of creating something, right? Creating the getting started on our semester-long project of creating a form builder, right? It should be you've already you've already downloaded a template from Bootstrap, download a couple of CSS style sheets, linked to some Bootstrap CDNs, and you should be working towards creating all those pages, right? The home page, the profile, whatnot. Yes, I see that a lot of you are already having a lot of activity on GitHub. That's great. And I'm only asking you that you do a little bit every day. Not to leave everything to the end. Right? That you are dedicating some reasonable amount of time to this course. All right. And up to this point, I see that everybody's pretty much doing that. I'd like to go over the project again that's due at the end of the semester. Make sure that we have, we understand what it is that we're asking you to build. I'd like to go over the first project assignment, which is the proposal, and also I've made some changes. That. All right. So first, let me show you what I've added in the website. If you go to the portal and you go where the course videos are, you'll notice that under the videos that we are recording for each lecture, right? For each section, underneath there's a couple links underneath. See that? So the examples and experiments we've been working on for the last week or so are now available on GitHub. If you click on that, you go to the GitHub for this particular section, right? And under there, you have a public. You have the experiments that we've been working on. You have the forms, the dashboard, the tables. Right, so all this source code is now available to you, right? Any commits that I've made about, there's only one commit up to this point. And you can see the index page that we worked on last week. You can look at the server configuration, right? Express, public, OpenShift, and the app.listen. So this is all source code that we worked on last week and the week before, right? And notice that I've also created under here, under public directory, I've created a couple of directories, right? The assignment directory, the experiments directory, the project directory, and you should be following somewhat of a similar folder structure where you're going to be working your assignment under this directory, right? Under your project, we're going to be expecting that that's where it's going to be, right? We're going to create some automated scripts that are going to assume that that's where we should find these files, right? That your file. So these are some of the experiments that we worked on last week. Also available from here, you see the OpenShift, where the actual source code is being hosted. The actual website is being hosted. Right, the welcome to CS5610, and the link to the assignment, and the link to the project. Okay? All right, so you can look at the source code and what it looks like when it's hosted online. All right? Okay. And this index file is what's going to be, it's going to be my landing page, right, for this particular section. You're going to create your own landing page, right, for your particular URL. And again, this should look spectacular, right? You should really be proud of this particular index page, right? So you look very, very professional, and I would love to share these links with my colleagues. Make sense? You have source code, and you have the way it's hosted. All right. I again want to go over the project proposal. We already went over the user interface development. That's the assignment that's due in a couple weeks, right? But at the same time, the project proposal is also going to be due, right? So you should be already thinking about the projects. A lot of you have come to me already with some ideas. We talked about it, so I'm asking you to formally create a document, a Google Docs document, and share it, and available also on the home page. And here's the description of what we're expecting. First, we're expecting for you to come up with a verbose description of what it is that you're trying to solve, right? Some kind of problem, right? And what would be your proposed solution. It doesn't have to be a unique problem, or it could be something that you might already seen out there, and love to see your particular solution. So just this at least a 200-word description of the problem in plain English. Here are some examples, right? The online application store, that you need to identify at least 2 human actors, right? There could be other actors, non-human actors, but at least 2 human actors, such as sellers, buyers, right? Developers, quality assurance. So these are, for different types of projects, you might have different types of human actors. If you can't think of a human actor, then you can safely assume that there's an admin user, right? I'm asking you to use a Lucidchart or some graphical tool to draw, right, the various pieces of your application. Typically, you have a representation of the various actors, right? The representation of them interacting with some kind of user interface, interacting with some server side middleware, interacting with some database, interacting with some third-party API, right, that lives outside of the cloud, and just describe each one of them, and underneath you can explain, what is the, what kind of requests is one asking, right? I'm searching for, right, recipes, and then the API responds with a list of recipes. A lot of students like to use sequence diagrams. I don't know if you're familiar with sequence diagrams. You have swimming lanes that describe how the various entities interact with one another, and the messages that are being sent between the various entities, right? The actor sends a request to the browser sends a request to the API, searches through its database. It responds with an array of certain objects, right? The UI renders these, right? And then the various use cases, right, can be used to organize those sequence diagrams. It's not required, but it might be a nice way to document the interaction between the various pieces. Definitely use case analyses, right? The various things that you can achieve, either organized by the various actors, or also you can organize them by the users, the various point of view of what are the things that each one of the actors wants to accomplish. Definitely use case UML class diagram that where you're going to capture a data model that tells us what is kind of the data that you're gonna be capturing, right? What are your various entities, and what's the relationship between these entities, Right? If you have one-to-one, you have one-to-many, many-to-many. If there's some mapping classes under there, you have a UML class diagram for the user, one for the domain object, for the domain object. Right? Any relationships that you might have, some of the all to user relationship, that's required. Right? User to domain relationship, that's required. Domain to domain, and also one to many and many to many. I believe we went through some of this already, didn't we? Yeah. This is a generic UML class diagram that somewhat tries to capture. It's a very generic class diagram that looks to capture most of what we would be expecting, and some examples of what they might be. Okay, so yeah, so frames. All right. I'd like to cover the wireframes just one more time, just in case. So here's a. Let me just mute this for a second. Stop sharing. Okay, so here's the user, right? That's going to come and visit your landing page, right? It's called the home page of your project. Right, this is for the project, right? And here you might, do a lot of marketing and a lot of splashy, very eye candy, very very pretty, right? Perhaps not much functionality here, or you might put some functionality here, but most of it perhaps could be just eye candy and explaining what it is and enticing you to continue using the website, right? But you might also put some functionality here. For instance, if people are tweeting or they're creating some kind of content, you might list here, the latest user that has joined, or the latest content that somebody has posted, the latest article. You might also put it here, right? But most of it, I would think that the home page or landing page it's just pretty, right? Just explaining what it is and wanting you to come in, right? As I go in, perhaps a search right here from the home, or perhaps from a separate page, I have some kind of search page that either navigate, or some students prefer to combine these pages into one, just like maybe like Google, right? Google, you go to Google, the only thing you see is just a search bar, right? And that's perfectly fine, right? It's simple enough. Others might prefer to separate and have a dedicated search page. In that search page, you might have a search bar there. You might type on it, and in here you might have also the search results also as part of this page. Some of you might want to navigate elsewhere, but you might want to stay here. As when you do a search, you might have a partial subset of that search results, maybe the first 10 or whatnot, right? And you would provide some kind of pagination to go left, right, and the next 10, whatnot. This is coming from a cloud service. So let me draw the cloud service here, so that when you're going out to when you do the search, this goes out to some kind of third-party API, right? With a query, some kind of query, and then this returns some JSON, maybe an array, right? And you render this will be here. This would be a summary of your results, right? Not if the JSON might contain quite a bit of data, right? That might not be appropriate to render it in a summarized fashion, right? If I click on any one of these search results, I might navigate to a details page, right? And that details page might have maybe several images, maybe a carousel, of some of the images that are associated. Maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a book, maybe it's whatever it is. Maybe it's a recipe with lots of pictures of what the food looks like, right? And
So you might have picked out just one of these as the thumbnails, right, for the search for the summarized version. But on a details page, you can splurge. You can have lots of space to display so much more information, right? If this is a movie, you might give out maybe the plot. You might give the plot, right? Quite a lot of data there. Maybe a list of the actors, right? So notice that we went to the API to get a matching, right? Several JSON objects that might have matched your query. When I click on a particular elements, right, of the search results, I might go to a details page. In this details page, this should also be filled with an additional query to the API, right? Oh, they want to look at the details of that one particular movie, right? Or that one particular song or whatever, right? Whatever you choose, whatever your domain object is. So you get here was an array, right, of JSON objects. Over here, you'll get just a single JSON object that comes back from the API, right? It'll come back, you'll render all the data dynamically, right? Plus, remember that there's a relationship between users and domain objects, right? One of those relationship is that it might be that somebody, a user in your system is creating some kind of review or posting some kind of comment on that movie, on that recipe, on whatever, right? So there might, if this is the very first time they've come here, there might not be any reviews or comments left by any user, right? But if there are, right, what you need to do is you need to the ID, right? The ID that of this particular object should be used to look it up if you have an entry for that in your local database, right? What happens here is that when we go out and search for these objects, typically each object that comes back from the API is going to have a unique identifier, right? It'll be some kind of ID or IMDb ID or whatever, right? It'll have a unique identifier for each one of the JSON objects that come back to you. And typically, to retrieve the details of any one object, you use another query, right? That you provide the ID of the object that you want the details for, right? And you get back a much more detailed version of that object, okay? With many more lists of images and a lot more data to render. That same ID that you're using here to interact with this API, you can use it, as a key, right? And you might have a table or a collection. You might have a collection where your domain object collection, where you might store certain things here for that particular object, right? Notice that up to this point, we haven't gone to our database at all. We've been interacting with some third-party API that has their own database, right? It has their own data model and whatnot, right? So up to this point, we don't know anything. But say somebody comes here and wants to bookmark, right? My favorite. I want to favorite, or maybe not heart, maybe a star, right? I want to favorite that. Well, to favorite, it means that I need to remember that, right? I need to remember that somewhere, right? I need to remember that the particular user who's logged in, right, is favoriting this particular object, right? Notice that up to this point, these objects only exist in the remote database. We have absolutely no information. We need to remember that somewhere. So what we'll need to do is insert in here. First, we'll need to see if it even exists. We'll use this ID, look up in the data in our own database to see if that object exists, right? Is there an entry of? Do we already have an entry for that? If we don't find it, we'll insert it. We'll insert that object in here with that ID, right? That remote ID. Right? It's almost like a primary key. I'm sorry. It's almost like a foreign key referring to somebody else's database, right? It's these two things, but they live in two completely different namespaces, right? Anyway, if we don't have it, we'll create it, right? If it's a person who's a particular person who's bookmarking this movie or this recipe, well, we'll need to create that relationship as well, right? If we have a users table or collection, and that user has a user ID, right? We'll need to create some kind of relationship. Either if you choose to do a mapping, there's some kind of mapping table here that's a user to data object, right? That relates these two. Relates that this particular user, right, likes that particular data object, right? And you have to make sure you have to. Does the object already exist, right? Does the user exist? Well, is it actually first of all, is the user logged in? What about the user logged in? I don't know the user ID, right? Is the user logged in? They never logged in, so I don't know who they are, right? So that brings us to another issue, is that you should not force me to log in to do any of this. Okay, anybody should be able to come here, right, and search movies and recipes and whatnot, right? Only when I need to know who you are, right, you will be forced to log in, right? If you want to favorite this, right, I can't do any entries. I can't remember anything. I mean, I know the object, but I don't know who you are, so I don't have a user ID for you, right? So up to this point, this has been a public access, right, to the entire website, right? I can peruse and look around and read everybody's comments, but not until I absolutely need to know who you are, you won't be challenged, right? So for instance, if I click on favorite, then you will be challenged with a username and password, right? If you're not already logged in. If you are logged in, then that's fine. I already know who you are. But if you're not logged in, you will be challenged with a login. So yeah, so most of the application should be public and accessible, and I can use it without forcing me to log in. Make sense? There might be some particular cases, some particular projects that you choose that you're definitely working with private information or sensitive information that you can convince me that no, you can't do anything unless you log in. So if that's the case, well, come to me and we can negotiate. All right. Okay. All right. So yeah. So that object. Now for that object, this particular domain object, I might already have some information about that domain object. If maybe maybe it's your second time coming to see the object, or maybe somebody else already came to see that object. Yes. And maybe they left a comment. Maybe they left a comment. They left a comment and their username. Another comment and a username. There's another comment and a username. Right. Now again, just like having to force you to log in if you wanna favorite, I would also have to force you to log in if you're trying to put a comment in there. Right. If I have a text area there. Comment area, I won't be able to actually post anything until I know who you are, right? I might type something in and click, right, and submit, and it says, oh, I don't know who you are. I'll log you in, and then I'll create that relationship, right? So for instance, here's a domain on collection that says, this user, right, this particular user, right, left a comment for that particular domain object, right? And the comment is whatever. Okay, it is an association relationship, right? It's associating two objects, right? And it's describing the association, right? What kind of comment or review, or want to leave something after that. Okay. What else? Right, so that when somebody else comes and visits this, either me coming back, right, to revisit this object, this domain object, or someone else coming and visiting the same object, what would happen is that I will need to display all those comments for that particular object, right? Notice that some data, this one at the top, I'm fetching from where? From the remote API, right? Whereas all the data down here is being fetched from the local database. You see that? Right. So whenever you visit, you go from the search results to a details page, you have to search two places, right? Using that ID, the domain object ID, right? First, I'll have to go to the API and retrieve the details, right? More information about the actors, plot, and whatnot. But I also have to make a local database access. Hey, do I already have some information about that object? Right? Has anybody commented on this object? Right? I need to do 2 queries. One in an AJAX call, right, to the API, and another local AJAX call to your particular database, right? Searching if I already have comments for that particular domain object. See that? Right? And then I'll have to fetch, right, the actual comment and the user who created it, because I need to display the comment itself and the user ID of who created that comment. Make sense? Right? If I click on a user's profile, on a user's ID, on a username, I should be able to navigate to their particular profile. Right? I have my profile, right? But I should be able to see somebody else's profile. Maybe not all of it. Maybe some public version of their profile, right? In my profile, I might have some sensitive information that I don't want to make public, right? I might have emails and phone numbers and things like that, right? That I don't want to make. I might have addresses. So when I visit somebody else's profile, right, I should visit a reduced version of their profile, right? Whatever they want to make public, or whatever you decide is public. Okay. So in their public profile, they might have, some maybe a picture of themselves, maybe. They might have a little description, and perhaps some objects that are related to it. Maybe the reviews that they have the reviews here, right? They've wrote reviews not only for this particular movie, but maybe reviews for other movies, right? So they might have a list here of comments that they've created, and a list of the for various movies. I should be able to navigate to any movie that they've commented on. So I'll go back to the details page for that particular movie that they commented on, right? I have a comment for Avatar, a comment for Star Trek or whatever, right? And if I click on it, I should be able to navigate to the details page of that particular other thing that they commented on, right? I can't edit their comments, but I could see their comments, right? Okay, so not only can I see all the movies that they've commented on, maybe I can see who's following them, who they're following, or who's following them, right? So I can discover other users. I can discover other people, right? If I like all the says, oh my goodness, this person has created lots of really cool content, right? I might favorite the person. It says, ooh, I want to follow this person, right? I click, it says I want to follow this person. So you might have here a relationship, a follows relationship that says, so and so is following someone else, right? Some relationship of user to user. Right? Or you might leave a comment to the person and say, "Wow, you're awesome," or whatever. You might leave a message for the person, just like you can leave a message and a whole bunch of comments for a particular domain object. You can also leave maybe a message for a user. Right? It's up to you. Right? What else? From here, from the home directory, if I log in, if I click on login, I'll definitely go to login, right? And after I log in, typically where I need to go is perhaps to my profile page, right? Because I wasn't really going anywhere, right? I just logged in. Right? It's not like you challenged me because I was trying to create some comment or because I was trying to favorite or anything. It's just I logged in. I can go to my profile, right? And remember, I believe we talked about this, right? In the profile, you should list all the things that a user is related to. Right? If I created comments, if I created any content, if I'm following other people, I should be able to see all that information from my profile. Okay. So yeah, I believe these are the 4 or 5 pages I listed in the document description, right? Which is due in a couple of weeks, right? There'll be a home directory, there'll be a login and registration page, there'll be a search and kind of a search results page, right? There'll be some kind of profile page, a details page, right? There'll be the use of some kind of third-party API, right? There'll be a use of your MongoDB database where you're going to be storing some information. Now, a lot of people come back to me and says, well, here we're storing some data, right, about the domain object, this domain object, right? I'm storing the ID. I'm just showing the ID here. Okay. It says, what should I do? Should I Should I copy down this database that is over there and perhaps and then import it into my database? No, don't do that. Right? That information is already being hosted by someone else, right? And what we want to do, we'll practice the techniques of accessing that information, right, through the use of RESTful APIs. Okay. So no, don't import data. There might be a few cases. There are some FDA data that some students have imported, or some subway information that is not available online, but they provided us either as comma separated values or XML that you can import into your database. Maybe you can convince me that you want to do that. That's fine. Much more interesting is accessing one of these online cloud APIs that are out there, and there's just tons of them, right? You go to programmableweb.com, right? That's a repository of tons and tons of free, well, mostly free APIs that are out there. Okay, and there's something bound to be of your interest in there. Anyway, so what is it? Notice that I am storing something about that object that lives out there, right? Notice that at least I need to remember that there is a relationship between a user and that particular domain object. And the only thing I really need is this foreign key, right? This ID that is referring to the object in the remote database. Yes. So I can reconstitute that object just with that ID. Yes. Right. That's all you really need. Although I will suggest that you cache not only this ID, this is kind of like a cache, right? It's a local cache in our database of that remote object. I don't need to have all the plot and all these pictures and the actors. I don't need to clone all the entire object locally in my database, right? Right. Notice that I will seldomly need all that information, right? I only need it very, very sparsely. Yes, right. And so it really doesn't pay to clone all that information and store it locally in my database. Also, that information might change from time to time, right? The plot, there might have been a typo and somebody fixed it, right? Or maybe they have an extended version of the plot. They fix a couple of things here and there. So it's better to use the remote data, right? Because if I cache it locally, my data is bound to become stale, right? Any new images that might be available, any new posters that might be available. So instead, the ID should be enough. That's unlikely that they will be deprecating the ID. Typically, that's one of the main ways that they know others are depending on those IDs, right? And those are the things that will change the slowest, if ever, right? But I will suggest that if you're going to be listing here, for instance, the titles of the movies, right, or titles of songs or whatever, that these titles also you store it here, you cache that, right? Not only do you cache the ID of the domain object, the things that you've commented on, but you also of the movie or song or a recipe that that you liked, right, or that you bookmarked, right? Maybe even a thumbnail you might also cache, right? Only so that you can list it. You can list it quickly enough without having to go and fetch all this data for each one individual object, right, from the API, right? So you can cache maybe, right, a little image, maybe the title, right, and the ID, right? I think that's safe. It's safe to cache those three things, only so that when you list it here, right, notice that to be able to fetch, I mean, you have the IDs. That's all you really need. You could go fetch this dynamically as you need it, right? But just to improve performance a little bit, what we're going to do is we're going to cache at least those three attributes, right? The ID, maybe a thumbnail, maybe a title, right? So that will be your lists of things, of recipes that you liked, and things that you're following, right, that you bookmarked, right, could be very quickly rendered here as a list. That makes sense?
right? But everything else, you should be able to retrieve dynamically, right? If I click here, I would go to the details page. With the ID, I can go to the API and fetch everything else and re-render this dynamically. Everybody okay? Yes? Okay. We'll be doing this in class, right? Much before you will need to do it yourself, right? And one of the assignments in the second assignment for the project, notice that there's two set of assignments, right? There's a set of assignments where you're building something that I'm asking you to build, which is a forms builder, right? And the second set of assignment is your project, right? And in your project, you decide what to build, right? Hopefully, having learned something from the assignments, right, you can apply those to your own projects. Make sense? All right. All right. Let's go. Any questions on the projects? All right. Okay, so if am I sharing my screen? Wait. I am, yes. All right. Let me. All right, so if you'll notice, each one of these modules has right after the fourth tab, the assignments tab, there are some additional tabs that give you some experiments, right? Some experiments that I've gathered just to cover some of the topics, and so we can talk about it. Right. So here's a couple of experiments or examples that are for covering the CSS topic, and some of them I'm guessing you're already familiar with this. So let's quickly go over some of these experiments just to make sure that we covered this material. First of all, you notice that you can choose from this dropdown. That notice that these are two iframes. One of them is hosts the actual an HTML that is implements the experiment, right? And underneath, right, is another iframe that shows the textual representation of what you see above, right? So this is the HTML. There's only one HTML page, right? So if you do the dropdown, there's only one thing, right, to look at. Some of the more involved experiments, they have various files, right? They have HTML, they have CSS, they have JavaScript, they have all sorts of things going on. But these first ones is just HTML, right? And if you click here, right, it'll open up the experiment in its own page, right? So anyway, so the topic of this particular experiment is to talk about what it's referred to as the box model, right? So everything that is rendered on the screen, right? Ultimately, it takes up some rectangular area in your window, right? And the browser has certain rules on how these boxes, right? All these rectangular areas, how do they render, right? From top to bottom, from left to right, what sizes, right? What if there's any spacing in between the boxes, right? And so all of this of the position of where these boxes, these rectangular areas, where do they fall, right? How far are they apart from each other? If they have any borders, if they have any white spaces in between, right? All this is referred to as the box model. And it has a default behavior that we talked about a little bit about last week, that certain elements, certain HTML elements fall under the either they're inline, right, or they're block, right? And these two families of elements, they describe a little bit of their behavior and how they behave around other elements, right? So for instance, we said that block elements basically took up the entire width of their parent container, right? That any content inside, right, would be rendered from left to right up until there's no more space, and it would just wrap. So we said that in blocks, once you reach the closing elements, it would add a vertical spacing, right? It would add a new line, right? So we introduced a couple of them last week. We said that the headers, right, H1, H2, right, those are all examples of block elements, right? And that paragraphs were also examples of block elements. And notice that the size, the width of the paragraph, as far as a window will expand, right? And any content inside, right, will wrap, right, from top to bottom. And at the end of the paragraph, when it closes the paragraph, it adds a vertical spacing, right, so that the next content can render, right? Here's another paragraph. Here's another header, and so on and so forth. Okay, they all add vertical spacing. Okay, so there, the X and Y position of where these things fall is based on this idea of the block or the inline, right? In the inline, like for instance, just plain text, right? Content just flows from left to right, right? And when there's no more, it just wraps to continue, right? From left to right, from top to bottom. Okay, and so these are the two default behaviors that regulate, that govern how things, where things going to show up from top to bottom, from left to right, right? What's the X, Y position of all these things, right? It calculates these as things bump into each other, right? And they don't fit, and things have to wrap. But you can take over the behavior of these elements. You can say, no, I don't want to use these rules. I want to make them my own, right? I want to make my own rules. And so you can, for instance, explicitly say what the X and Y position of a rectangular element is. You can explicitly say what the width of an element is, or the height of something, right? You can say whether you want borders around it, right? You can say whether you want internal white spacing or outside white spacing, right? How far are elements from each other, margins, right? Or how much element of white spacing is there inside of this box, of this rectangular area. So here's an example of one of these boxes, right? This is, just like this is one single paragraph, this here is one single div, right? That has been altered, right? Its width has been altered, right? The spacing between the outside elements that surround it, right? Called the margin, that has been altered. How much spacing do you want between anything that is around me? The size of the border has been altered, right? And also the color of that border. The padding, right? The spacing inside of the box, right? Has been altered. How much spacing do I want between the actual content inside and the surrounding box, right? Also, the background color has been altered, right? All of these can be configured using just plain old CSS, right? CSS has rules and attributes that can manipulate this look and feel, right? So let's take a look at what that looks like, right? If we look at if you right click and ask to view the page source, this is the source that comes from the server. This is the little text, right, that was downloaded from the server, right? It was copied locally on a local copy of that file, but now lives locally, right? So if you open that up, it says, hey, this is the text that came from the server, right? This is what I am interpreting. This is the text that I am interpreting. So notice that we have several. We have an H1. We have the div, right? We have this div over here. Right, this div over here. We have box one is this one over here, right? This box over here. Oh, it wasn't a paragraph at all. It was just plain text. Okay. Here we have box two, which is down here. That's box two over here. Some text, and then with an ID of box two, which is this one, this div over here, which is blue over here, this bluish lorem ipsum, and then some content down below. Make sense? Everybody okay? Notice that I took some liberties and I made this a very bare bones HTML file. I stripped it out the doc type. I stripped it out of the outer HTML elements, right? I stripped it out of the head, of the body. I stripped it to its bare bones, absolute simplest forms here, right? So this might not be considered HTML. Some would refer to this, maybe it's a template, right? It would say snippet of HTML, maybe to be used as inclusion into another HTML document, right? And we'll be doing that soon enough, right? Perhaps next week we'll get started, where HTML elements, HTML pages will stop being, the full-blown HTML document. They'll start being these snippets of HTML, right? To be used dynamically to build larger pages, okay? Right? Anyway, so let's see, what are we doing here? So here we have some CSS at the top, right? And we have box one. So maybe it refers to this box one down here, and it does actually, right? What this is a CSS rule that says grab the element, right, whose ID, that's what the hash means. The hash means look at an element whose ID is, okay, right? So understanding that IDs should be unique, that means that there should be only one box one in this entire page, right? It must refer to this div, right? So this is pattern matched. This rule is pattern matched to refer to this one div. This one div over here, right? And it says, I want to do the following. These are the kinds of transformations I want you to do, right? By default, you would have a particular paddings, a particular margins, particular border size, fonts. Those are the defaults that you inherit from the browser. The browser gives you this default look and feel, right? And this rule is going to override those defaults, right? I'm going to override it and says, no, I don't want the boring white background. I want to make it red, right? So notice I'm using these attributes, right? That I can refer to various styling attributes that I want to convert, right? I can change the background to be red, changing the width to be 500 wide and 200 in height. Okay, makes sense? And if you measure, it actually refers to this width from here all the way to here, right? It's the inside width and height, okay? Not the outside width and height, right? So it could be tricky, having to compute what is actually the footprint of this rectangle, right? Because if I make the borders and the margins and everything adds up to the entire footprint, right, of how much space is it taking in your window, right? In JavaScript, you can calculate this. You can say, well, I want the outer width, right, not the inner width, right? So these stylings here are referring to the inside, right, the content that is inside. I want it to be 500 by 200. The color, that refers to the foreground color, so I want the font to be white. I want the margins, that surrounds this entire area, right? That's a space between this content and any other outside content. If you have any paragraphs, any outside texts, headers, or whatever, that's a space between me, right, my box, and everything else. So that's the margin. You can also control the border. You can say that I want the border width to also be 50 pixels, right? That's this border around here, this green border, right? That says I want it to be color green, right? The background, the border color is green. Also the style, we're saying that it's solid, right? So this is like a solid line going around. You can change it. It could be dotted, right? It could be dashed. There's various styles of borders that you can choose from. Padding, that's the space, that's the inner space between the actual content and the border. So between the border, right, and the actual content, we have 50 pixels. Right, that's the border, all the padding all around it. Okay, and you can be more specific. You can have a margin here is referring to the margin all around us, right? The margin above, below, to the left, to my right, right? The padding, same thing. All right, it's referring to the padding above, below, left, and right. But you can be more specific. you can say, I want the margin dash top. I want to change the margin in the top. I want to keep everything else but its default. Okay? Or you can be very specific. I want the top and the bottom, right, to be 50, but everything else default. Make sense? Same thing with the padding, right? You can be as specific. Box two, which is, I believe, down here. So this box says that it wants to be width and height. We want it to be 300, right? The background blue and the foreground color white. So notice that the width of this is 300, which is also the height of this is also 300, right? The width is 500. Okay. Okay, did that make sense? All right, that should be fairly easy. Let's go back. So there's a couple of these centered. So typically, if you a lot of the content, a lot of the websites tend to center their content, right? Where you have an equal spacing on the left-hand side, equal spacing on the right-hand side, right? And there is a center element in HTML, right? But it's currently frowned upon. Remember, anything that has to do with configuring the styles, right? It should be done through CSS, right? Not through dedicated elements. So to achieve that effect, right? Oops. Oh, no, sorry. We can take a look at it and notice that what we have here is a div, right, which has an h1 in the middle in there, and then just plain old contents, right? And notice that it has a class that says centered, right? Notice it's not an ID. It's not an ID. It's a class, right? And the way rules apply to classes is through the use of dots as opposed to hashes, right? Remember that in the previous example we used hash. When you use hash, you're saying I want an single element whose ID is so and so, right? Box 1, box 2, whatever, right? And there should be only one box 1 and only one box 2. Whereas here I'm saying that anybody who has this class, right, which is centered, that's what this says, right? Anybody who has this class centered, I want to apply the following attributes, transformations, right? I want to set its width to be 600, right? And I want to make its margins margin auto, right? And this is what achieves together the width, right? Setting a width and setting a margin auto is what achieves that that styling of having the content, center right in the middle of the page. Make sense, right? We added a couple more things here. We just added this text align. Right, this allows you to align the text either left-hand side or align it to your right-hand side, or justified. Right, justified means that the content is flush with its margins. Right, and that's what we see here. Right, notice that the content now it's flush, right, as opposed to be jaggedy. Right, if you typically the default is to justify it to the left. Right, text justifies to the left, flush on the left-hand side. But it's all jaggedy on the right-hand side, right? And you can change that to be text align justify. Make sense? Everybody good? All right. Yeah. So we'll see that Bootstrap uses this mechanism, right, to achieve this this centering styling. Okay. Let's see, class. So in this example, it's a very simple example. Notice that it just says hello world and it says blue. It's all blue, right? It looks like it's a heading 1 and it's all blue. So let's look at the source code. And the source code says that hello world, the h1 here, has a class called blue color. You see that? Right? And but notice if you look at the style up there, you notice that there are two H1s. You see that? They're both referring to the same H1. One of them says H1, says, I want all H1 to be red. Okay? Whereas the other one says, I want all H1 who have the following class, right? So you can combine names of elements such as H1, P, right, div. You can combine the names of the elements. You can combine them with IDs, or you can combine them with classes, right, to make more specific rules. Rules that are more specific. So notice that H1, okay, notice that H1 here is more of a global rule, whereas this H1 blue color is much of a more specific rule. Okay, so these are kind of like fighting over this, right? They're colliding. They both want to change my H1, right? And this is where specificity comes in, right? So the browser follows certain rules on, you know, to be able to resolve these ambiguities, right? It follows rules and is referred usually to as the specificity rules. You know, which one is more specific, right? First, we'll check to see if there are any styles locally right on the elements. If there are styles right on the elements, it says, oh, this one is the closest to the elements, so it must be, right, you know, it has the narrowest of context, so this must be it, right? This must be it, right? Then it follows as well. Okay, then it'll check to see. You know, which one's closest to me. Perhaps you have the order of this might also come into play, right? The latest one wins, right? If you have two that are overriding each other, right, they have equal specificity, the latest one wins, right? The closest one to the element wins, right? If this is if you have some CSS that is declared outside, that's farther away than something that's declared here in the style, yes, element. And it's but the style attribute is the highest specificity, right? It's the one that is right next to the element that is being styled. Notice here that H1, even though it's declared afterwards, right, it doesn't win over this one. This one is much more specific. It says it's the H1 that has that particular class, right? It says, oh, you're talking about this particular H1 as opposed to any H1, right? So that's why this one wins out over that one, right? It's more specific. Oops, sorry. I guess yellow is not a good color. So here we have also some other examples, right, where you might have several rules, right, that are competing over the look and feel of a particular element, right? Notice that the first one says H1 head, I want it to be yellow. Whereas it says H1 wants it to be red, and H1 dot blue color wants to be blue. Right? Again, which one wins? Right? So notice that since so if I only look at H1, that means that I'm talking about any H1, right? If I'd say H1 dot blue color, that's a little more specific, right? I'm not talking about all H1s. I'm talking only about there might be a subset of those H1s. Yes, so it's a little more specific, but even more specific is if you're talking about an ID, because IDs typically is just one of them, right? The idea is that this is specifically talking about one particular H1, right? So that's why in this particular case, yellow wins over the other ones, right? Yes. Yep.
Why use the same color and ID and class in the same tag?
I was just pointing out. Right, and they were both referring to the same element, but one wins over the other because one is ID more specific than the class. Yeah, you wouldn't actually do this. I'm trying to cover the specificity topic. Inheritance. The relationship between elements is also important, right? If you have elements that are included in other elements, right, that are children to other elements, right, that have a parent element, and you have other elements that are inside, they look and feel from their parent, right, by default, right? And there too, right? The rules have to be figured out, right? Which one wins, right? So here we have excuse me, we have a CSS inheritance, right? And we have is this a paragraph? Yeah, it's a paragraph. Right? You have the header out here, right? And you have a paragraph in here that has embedded in it another element, B, right? And the paragraph says that I want the color, right, the foreground color to be blue, right? But and if I leave it like that, this inside element would also be blue, right? The looking element would also be foreground blue. But I am overriding it and it says no. I want the B elements to have the following color red, right, and the background green, right? And notice that it overrides, right, and it takes up the styling that is more specific to that one element down below. Okay. Inline. Inline. How is this an example for inline? Style. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yes. Notice that you can be more specific about something, right? If you explicitly say what the style is, right where the element is, right? That is much more specific of either declaring it the style element or declaring an outside CSS, right? So here we're saying that I want the foreground to be green, right? And it's competing against this ID and this class, right? So the ID says that it wants to be yellow, whereas the class wants it to be blue. And again, they're competing, but the style attribute, right at the element overrides all the other ones. Well, that's why it's green. Link. So notice that all this time we've been doing everything in style in the style elements, right? And I'll be saying it often several times. Even if you see me using the style element in class, do not use the style element for your assignments or for your projects, okay, or your homepage. Right? Do not use the style elements or the style attribute. Right? All styling should be done outside, linked through CSS files. Okay. So this example, let me open it up. Declares two styles, right? It declares style 1 and style 2 under a directory called CSS. You see that? Right? And we can open it up. You can open style 1 and we can open up style 2. And presumably these are also going to compete against each other, right? You know which one wins, right? And so here we have a simple paragraph, right? H1, H2, and another paragraph, right? And right, notice that it's declared before style 2. You see that? So in document order, right, style 1 is declared first, and then style 2 is declared second, right? So if style 2 has any styles that compete with style 1, style 2 would win, right? Just because of the order in which it was declared, right? So style 1 is saying that I want all headers to be beige, whereas style 2 says that H1, all headers, header 1, the background color should be red instead, right? And the foreground should be white. Because of the order in which they're declared, which one you think would win? The second one wins, right? Because of the order, right? So when you see it rendered, notice that the background of H1 is indeed red, okay? All right, then what else do we have here? It says that, okay, so we know H1. What about, here we have declaring P, paragraph, which doesn't look like it's competing against style 2. And then style 2 is just declaring H2, which is not competing with anything, right? So if we look at that, H2 should render green. It does. And then render with foreground blue, which it does. All right. This is just to point out the fact that
document order also means, right, that they compete and the last one wins, basically, right? We're going to be using this technique throughout the course. What we're going to do is we're going to bring down Bootstrap first, right? We're going to link to a remote Bootstrap style sheet, right, which is going to style most of our page. But we're going to want to customize it a little bit, right? You know, by default, Bootstrap rounds all the corners of the input fields. Maybe we don't like that. Okay, maybe we want it to be, you know, straight, right? So what you can do is have your own style sheet, right? And look at how, you know, what is the rule that triggers that rounded corners, right? What you can do is copy that rule from Bootstrap, right? You can look at it in your browser, paste it in your style, right? And then override whatever you want, right? It says, no, I don't, you know, I want the 0. I don't want it to be any rounded corners, right? Or I want the highlight to be a different color. Or I want the headers, instead of being black, I want them to be, you know, whatever you want. Make sense? So we're gonna use this technique to override and customize our look and feel, so that, you know, we can leave the we can have Bootstrap do most of the work, but customize it to be our own. Make sense? All right. And it works because of the order of declaration. All right, any questions so far? All this makes sense, right? Position. So position, again, all this is how to style things, the order of evaluation, the specificity. But, you know, going back to the box model, right? We can control the exact position of content, right? Have paragraph and content, right? Just flow from left to right, from top to bottom, and by default, nothing overlaps anything else, right? That's the default behavior. You know, everything is well defined of where it's going to show up on the page, right? This overlap, we forced it, right? And let's see how we forced it. We can look at the source code. We can look at the source code. Hello. We can look at the source code, right? And that's the content, the div, box 1 and box 2, and we're overriding box 1. See that? We're grabbing box 1 and doing certain things. What are we doing? All right, 350 and 200. That makes sense. The background is blue. The foreground is white. But now we are overriding its behavior in position, right? Its attribute position. See that? Okay. Position has several values that we can use, right? One of them being absolute. And what absolute says is that, you know, with respect to the window, I want an absolute position, right? To be 50 pixels from the top and 50 pixels from the left. Okay? And that's how we achieve this behavior. Notice that it's 50 pixels above and 50 pixels from the left. You see that? And we can position it wherever we want, right? Using these attributes. But notice that it scrolls, right? It goes up and down with the content, right? So it's relative, right, to the rest of the content. You see that? Right? If the content moves, it moves, right? But there are other values for the position, right? We could say that it's static. I don't want it to be. I'm sorry, fixed. I don't want it to move this, right? Meaning I want to position it, and even if I scroll everything else, I don't want it to move. It's fixed. It's right there where I told it at the beginning. I don't want it to ever move from there, right? Those are interesting effects. If you want to have, you know, menus that don't scroll, right? That are always there, and they'll let you jump around the page, right? Right from this one menu that you can maybe hover and it comes up, right? It appears. You can change. You can jump around and then it disappears, right? When you don't need it anymore. So you can use that for a nice effect. Notice that I'm always, you know, right clicking, looking at page source. See that? View page source.
I can also use this inspect. You see that? This inspect. Inspect opens up a console, a browser console, that tells me how it interprets the page. This is the browser's understanding of that text, right? Of the page source, right? This is how I parsed it. Once I parsed it, this is what I understand the page looks like, right? Notice that it has tabs down below. You see that? One of the tabs is called Elements, right? And Elements is its version of having parsed this. Its model, its representation, its object representation of the page, how it interprets the page should look like, right? Notice that it has parsed it, and notice that it has an object model that is much nicer than ours. Remember that we didn't have any HTML in our pages. See that? Remember that? We didn't have HTML, but it understands, right? Most browsers are very, very forgiving, right? And it'll do its best to understand what you meant. Okay, this is its best interpretation of having parsed that page. Okay, you didn't include HTML, but I guess you meant that this is an HTML document, so it creates its own HTML node. Okay, notice that this is not text, right? Although you can copy as if it were text, you can copy from here, but it's an object model, so it's objects that are nested inside of each other. See that? It's objects. Right? Notice that I didn't have a body. Yes, I didn't have a head. But it understands that all HTML documents have a head and have a body, so this is its best interpretation, right? It did notice that I had a style element in there, right? And what it did, it parsed it and it put it under the head element, because it says, well, this is where it should have been. So this is its best interpretation of what I'm doing. Make sense? Right? Under there is just plain text, right? You could copy that. Notice that it added a body element under there too, and this is its best interpretation. No, although I didn't have any body elements, right? But this is its best interpretation, and then it parsed both divs. Everybody okay? Right? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Most browsers, most modern browsers have some kind of console, right? Chrome, Safari, I think have one of the nicer consoles. And when we'll get to the later on with JavaScript, we'll be able to look at source code, JavaScript, be able to step through the JavaScript. It's very, very powerful, very, very powerful tool for debugging, for looking at really what's going on. How is the browser? Why is the browser behaving the way it's behaving? Right? This is a console that allows you to do that. Anyway, let's go back here. So notice these are the two boxes. One has the content, right? Notice that I understand that there's just plain text under there, right? And for box 2, also plain text, right? Notice on the right-hand side, well, first of all, notice that as I hover on the left-hand side, right? As I hover, right, it understands, hey, this is what notice that it highlights at the top on the browser, says this element that you're looking at, this piece of objects, representation, this is what I interpret on the top side, right? If I hover over box 1, notice that it highlights, right, the entire box 1. If I hover over box 1, notice that it highlights only the blue here, right? And notice that on the right hand side, it says on the right hand side, it says this is a styling. This is a styling that I am applying to this box. Okay, some of it comes straight from our page, right? That it parsed in our style elements. It says I grabbed that from line 2 of position.html. See that? Right. The rest, excuse me. The rest is some default styling that is inherited from the browser's default style sheet. Right? So for instance, by default, right, this is being rendered as a block. Okay, and also you can change this. You can play around with the values live, right, and see how it changes on the screen, right? And designers use this often, right, to to live edit, right, their content to see how once they see how it behaves live on their browsers, right, they then copy these values and go back and they update their LESS or their CSS style sheets, right, and then they test it to see if it works, right. They can change color, green, yellow, ew. The color white, and position top. You can change the left, its actual position, and play around with it and see if you like it. Also gives you a box representation of all the various attributes, right? What are the margins here? What are the margins? What are the borders? What are the paddings? The actual physical calculated, right, X, Y, width, and height of the actual content inside, right? Notice that the positions are out here as well. Position, right, top, left, and top, as I was changing it. And you can play around with these as well. You can play around with these values. You can increase it, and it changes live. Right? So it's a great tool for playing around with pages and see how you can achieve the style that you want. Right? We'll come back later with playing around with console and sources and network. For instance, in networks, right, if you refresh, it tells you, right, what are all the resources that it has to download from the server, right? In this case, it only downloaded one HTML file. That's all it downloaded. But if this was linked to a CSS style sheet, you would see that it would show here, I also had to download these two other files, right? These two other style sheets, right? If it had to download Bootstrap, it would go off, you would see the HTTP requires that it had to do to go out and fetch Bootstrap from the CDN, right? And gives you timelines. You could see what the various performance of each one of these files, so you can identify what's making your page load fast or slow or whatnot. Anyway, we'll come back to this a little later. But yes, please start playing around with this tool. You can pop it up as a separate window on the side. Very powerful. All right. Okay, so let's see. Position. Make things sticky. Ew. So for instance, you have two pieces of content here with the main content, and notice that the header. Actually, notice that this is kind of like a header footer down below. And notice that as I scroll, right, the header stays in place and the footer stays in place, right? Again, this is achieved using the position, position attribute. But notice at the top, the lorem ipsum above, right? And we'll see how that is achieved, because when you start moving things around and overriding their default display, whether it's block or inline, things start to shift around, right? And they start behaving weirdly, because when you say that something is position absolute, what you're doing is that, hey, this particular object is no longer subject to the default behavior or calculation of where to position things, right? If you put a div and another div down below, the default is to go all the way width, right, and then add vertical spacing, right? But if you take the first div and you say that it's position whatever, right, you're saying that, oh, this one no longer its position is no longer calculated by the browser, right? It's explicitly configured by styling, right? That means that it no longer plays into the calculation of this side effect, right? So let's look at the style for this. So we can expect, and we can see here that here's HTML, here's the head at the top, right? And we had a style sheet there, right? That that has two configurations. It configures a class called sticky. It configures another class called footer, and then body. What body is that? It is the body, right? It's the main body. I can also style the main body, Okay. So let's see. So down below we have what? We have body, and then we have, let's see, we have a sticky, I guess, header. I guess that would be a better name. Then we have some text, and then we have again some sticky footer at the bottom. You see that? Right? Well, the sticky top, right, the header, let's see what notice that as I highlight, right, notice that it highlights on the left-hand side. See that? So the sticky at the top, it says, okay, well, the background is black. Well, obviously it is black. The foreground is white. Notice the position fixed. It says, I want it to be here, and I don't want it to move, regardless of what everything else does, right? If everything moves around, I don't care. Leave it here, okay? Then we configure a top. It says that I want its position relative to the top of the page. I want it to be 0. So I want to be stuck at the top, okay? Then left and right. Notice the left and right, right? And notice it says left 0, meaning I want its left-hand side to be stuck to the left-hand side of the page, and I want its right to be stuck to the right-hand side of the page, right? Notice that I never said how wide do I want this to be. See that? Right? The width, notice that it changes, right? Right, by the size of the window. See that? If it doesn't fit, its height changes because it doesn't fit, right? It wraps and makes more space, right? We can change that too. We could say, we can fix the width and say, I want it to be of a particular width, right? Because a header makes no sense that it grows like that, right? And be careful because the bootstrap header does grow if something doesn't fit, right? You know, if the content inside starts wrapping around and starts pushing, it grows, and that would be unacceptable. Right? Be sure to grab your content, right, and start moving it around to see if you have any weird behaviors of things that are wrapping that shouldn't be wrapping, okay? Or that the height of the header is growing when it should not be. Be careful, all right? Make sure you take a look at that. All right. So the footer, same thing. The footer is fixed. So the footer, same thing. We put in the bottom with the position. We say fixed. The bottom. So I want the bottom to be fixed to the bottom of the page, and then left and right. Right, sticks the left and right to each side. Right. Notice that by sticking the left and the right to the sides of the window, right, I'm basically giving it a width. See that? Which is kind of weird, right? I didn't explicitly give it a width, but it has a calculated width. It's an inherent width, right? By the fact that I'm fixing its left and its right to 0. Make sense? And finally, notice that I added a padding of body Z of 100 pixels. What's all that about? Well, that's what I mentioned earlier. What I mentioned earlier. Notice where the content starts down here, right? It's 100 pixels from the top of the page. From here to the bottom of the page, to this Lauren Mason, it's 100 pixels, right? If I wouldn't have done that, say if I take the body, right? We go to the body. Notice that there's a padding 100. You see that? If I remove that, it says I don't want that styling. Notice that it goes to the top. I don't see that, right? We see the header, right? Overlapping the body, right? And that's because we set position fixed. We set position fixed. What does that do? It says you are no longer you're no longer in the normal flow of the document, right? You have been removed from the normal flow, right? That means that when we calculate the position of everything else, we're not going to consider it, right? Right. So that means that you used to, if the position wasn't fixed, if it was I think the default, right, the position. So if I remove position fixed, notice that the default is to just push down the content below me, right? That's the default behavior. But because it removes you from the normal flow of the content, you're no longer pushing anything, right? So if I put fix again, right, then the content, it kind of like goes underneath the header. You see that? It's a very common problem, right? And the way to fix that is to ourselves push things down, because we know that the header is going to overlap it. Make sense? Right? So the way we push it down is that we go to the body and we add some kind of padding, right? And we say, push the content down a little bit, right, to make up for the header that is now floating, right? It's no longer part of the rendering. Make sense? Okay. And notice that I'm only changing the padding of the top, right? I'm leaving the padding default. Yes.
What will happen if we fix the height of the header and the footer and we try to shrink the page? What will happen to the header?
Yeah. So. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So let's look at that, right? So if you have the sticky, right, and you put a height, maybe let's say 100. This much maybe 75 pixels. Okay, notice that it's shrinking. It's not changing, but notice that the content inside, it's not visible, right? And
It's coming down. The content is coming
oh, there it is. I'm sorry. There's the content. See that? It's spilling over. I notice that it's spilling over. So there's a couple of things that we could do, right? What this says is that the default behavior is if it doesn't fit, the height will be fixed, right? But any content will spill over, right? So there's a couple ways of fixing this. One flows, right? If the content doesn't fit with the calculated or fixed height, right? Maybe let's change the color so that it's more. Let's put it gray. Right. One thing we could do is say that the overflow, any overflow, I just want to clip it. I just want to hide it. I don't want to see the overflow, right? Just don't show it to me, right? So we have several options here. So we could say hidden, which is this the overflow. If it overflows, it's just hidden, right? And so notice that's kind of fixed it, right? So you notice that it's no longer there, right? Another option would be to say that I want it to scroll. Right, we say to scroll. So if it doesn't fit, notice that now I have scroll bars. I have nested scroll bars. Don't ever show nested scroll bars. Okay, there might be a few very very specific use cases where you might have a nested scroll bar, but they're very suspect. Okay, maybe you have a nested table for super users and admins that don't mind what these things look like, right? But for end users, right, this would be unacceptable, right? Nested scroll bars, right? So again, for super users and administrators, maybe it's okay, right? But for end users, it would just look awful, right? So anyway, so no scrollers. I would, notice that the scroll bar by default is taking up the vertical scroll bars, right? And you can control each one of them. You can say what kind of overflow you want. You want the overflow in one of the directions, just the X or only the Y, right? You can be very specific on what kind of scroll bars you want. Okay. So no, I would just hide it, right? And then when you start changing the size, you would say, why are some things just disappearing? Where am I not seeing? So you would have to revisit. Maybe you put too many things in your header, right? By default, Bootstrap does not hide its overflow, right? It grows, right? And still things starts to wrap around, and maybe you want to override that. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Make sense? All right. Let's see, sticky. Z-index. So Z-index is controls the the order in which things are rendered, and this also tells us what things are rendered on top of each other, right? Typically, we don't need a Z-index, right? Because following the normal rendering of things, right? The default rendering, everything flows from left to right, from top to bottom, right? And things, just push things, other things to a side, right? To make space for the new content. Yeah, everything just grows vertically, right? But when we start working with position and overriding that default behavior of calculating of what things render where, right? Like for instance, in this case, the header overlaps on top of the body, right? And this gives we need a separate way of controlling this, right? So we already saw that things, are rendered in a, in a plane, right? In the window is a plane, an XY, vertical, horizontal plane. But when things start to overlap, you kind of start thinking about, well, what about, the other dimension, right? Coming away from the monitor, right? So the z-index allows you to, what we have here is 3 overlapping rectangles or squares, right? That we are controlling in, who gets to render on top of what, right? Typically, the order would be in the document order, right? Last one wins. Renders on top of the other documents of the other divs, right? So if you have div 1, 2, 3, div 3 would render on top of div 2, right? And div 2 would render on top of div 1. That's the order in which things are rendered, right? But we can override that and do it with this example. And we can look at the, we can inspect it. And let's put it to the side. Right? So we have here, we can look at the have 3 boxes, 1, 2, 3. Okay? And we can look at the styling of the boxes. If I hover, notice that there's 1, 2, and 3. Notice that by default, 3 should render on top of 2, right? Because it's the last box. Box 2 is rendering on top of box 1. That makes sense because box 2 is after box 1. And box 1 is underneath. That makes sense because it's the first box that was declared. Okay? But we are overriding some of this. So if you hover over box 1, it says background color is yellow, 300, 300, position is absolute, 100 and 100, right? So it's 100 from the left and 100 from the top, and its z-index is 2. Okay, let's look at box 2 and box 3, right? So notice what happened here is that box 1 and box 2, notice that the only difference that they have, right? Well, other than the position changes, right? Notice that box 2 is nudged a little bit, 50 pixels to the right and 50 pixels. Difference, well, actually no difference. That box 1 and box 2, they both have the z-index. You see that, right? And by default, all elements have index 0, right? When they render, they all have index 0. Last one wins. Last one renders on top of the other, right, regardless of the z-index. So in this case, here you have box 1 and box 2. We are overriding, and we're saying they both have index 2. Okay? They have index 2. Meaning they still have the same index, just like when they... And so the rule is that the last one just renders on top of the first one, right? The last one, box 2, renders on top of box 1 because of the document order, okay? But here we're going to override. I'm going to say box 3. Notice that, again, they're nudged 50 pixels more. But it has index 1, meaning it has a less index rather than box 1 and box 2, right? Right, so by default, it would have rendered on top of the blue, right? So notice if I change this to 2, it has the same index as all the other ones. So by default, since it's the last one, it wins and renders on top of the other 2, right? But because I make an index less than, it says, no, you're going to go underneath these 2. The other ones have both index 2. They render on top of you. Make sense? Right? Same thing if I go to box 1. Even if it's the first one, it should always be the last one. I can increase its index to 3, and it comes up to the top. Make sense? Right, here's where you can play around with these indices. All right. Specificity, I think we talked about specificity quite a bit, about what gets rendered when. But let's look at this. So here we have, on the header, we have several styles, right, which control H1, IDs, classes, right, and notice that we have here two H1. One that says that it's red. Okay, right. So we have this. We have down below. We have content. We have two H1s. These two H1s. One of them has an ID, a class, and a style. Right. And by order in which we said earlier, the attribute is going to override everybody else. Right. Notice that it wants it to be green. But H1 is not green. What happened here? Who's making it blue? Well, let's see the class header 1. Header 1 says that it should be gray. It's not gray. The ID1, which is this ID1, says that it's yellow. It's not yellow. Oh, wait, no, background yellow. Yes, the gray. But the background is not gray. So the ID definitely beats the header, the class. But who made it blue? None of these are making the foreground blue. Well, this one is making it blue. This important. See that? That overrides anything. It says, I don't care what anybody else says, right? I want you to do this, right? Because I have all these rules. They're competing against each other. It says, forget it. I want you to do this because I want. You're frustrated. It says, ah! Important will override anything, even the local style, right? The local attribute. Okay, but then what if you have two importance? Right? So use important very lightly, right? As your last resort. Okay, you should not have importance all over your code, right? So that just says that you're desperate. You're in desperation. It says, cares. Anyway, and then we have visibility. So visibility controls on what is visible, right? Like what it suggests, right? And there's two basic ways to control. Use the attribute visible, where things are visible, or display, right? Now here we have a yellow box, blue box, and red box, and we have some styling here that says yellow box. Okay. It's commented out. So notice we have blue box here in the middle, right here, and we can either use visibility hidden, meaning don't show it, or display none. Element had never been added to the DOM, right? To the document, the HTML document. What would it display? How would the rest of the page render? As opposed to visibility says, no. It is in the document. I just don't show it, right? So let's look at that. So let's grab blue box. Here's a blue box. So one way we could do is either click on visibility hidden. So what happens is it's just not shown, but notice that it takes up the same space, right? It's as if it's visible, right? But it's still included in the calculation of the location of everything else, right? So let's put it back in. If I click on display, notice that it's as if it were never there, right? It's removed from the object model of the document, and it's not included in the calculation of the positioning of everything else. Make sense? Right? And last, we have float. Okay, we'll come back to float when we come back on Thursday and start thinking how we can use float to create a grid system, right? That looks very much like what Bootstrap gives us.
All right. Okay.